can the other panel members please come forward? We'll start our panel session. So leading up to lunch, we're going to have a number of people sitting up front here who will provide us with some insight into how we might kickstart this industry. So, okay, so if the panel members just
Okay, I don't know if everybody can hear me sort of clearly. I was sitting in front row, so it was easy for me to hear.
actually, do we need a mic?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You just pass this around.
So I'm. Is that on? Okay. So I'm Kirby Ikin. It's not. Yeah. It's on. It's on. It's on. Is it on? Yes. Yeah, I can hear. Okay, is anybody hearing me now? Yeah. Okay, so I'm Kirby Ikin. I'm here in my capacity as President of Deep Space Industries. For what it's worth, our CEO Daniel Faber and I are both alumni from Uni of New South Wales. I'm also the Chair of the Advisory Committee of the Australian Centre for Space Engineering Research. I'm probably a little bit different from most people in this room in that I have a law degree and a commerce degree. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist. I guess that's why I'm here on this panel, to talk about the business kind of considerations with asteroid mining. And that's probably enough. I mean, I'm also the founder of the Australian Space Industry Chamber of Commerce, which is now the Space Industry Association of Australia.
Which sponsored this to some extent.
Hi, so I'm here in my capacity as co-founder with Andrew and also scientist at the University of New South Wales and several other startups of Delta V, which is conceived as two things: an accelerator focused on the space vertical, specifically around Space 2.0 companies, and a company to transform access to low Earth orbit, essentially by flying rideshare scale CubeSats. And my background, I have got an engineering background back in the day, so my PhD was in aerospace engineering in the UK, largely funded by defence kind of interests. But I've also had a 20-year career in the digital industry across IPTV and commerce and clients and sponsorship and so on. So I'm coming back to space after a long time in the corporate world. And most recently I've been working a lot in the startup sector in both Australia and ASEAN region. So that's, I guess, one of the reasons I'm here. How's that?
Great, thanks. Is this working? Is this mic working? Okay. Yeah, so I'll ask a couple of questions and you can share the answers amongst yourselves and then we'll pass over to the audience. One of the things that I think is our topic is kickstarting this industry, right? So one of the problems I see with kickstarting, or this idea of kickstarting the industry, is this bootstrapping idea that I think that everyone sort of recognises at this stage that the idea of bringing resources back to Earth is not feasible. The idea would be to use the resources in space. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be a market. And will the market exist without the demand, and will the demand exist without the market? There's a bit of a problem there. Does anyone want to comment on how we might get around that nexus?
think, speaking for the government side, if you look at what NASA has done with commercial crew, commercial cargo, there's a great incentive to try to move more, multiply the money that we spend on the government side with the opportunity for companies to make money, beyond just us being the only customer. But for example, work at the moon, one day we may go back to the moon, we may need to build an infrastructure, and we'd be willing to pay, I think, for services if industry is ready to provide those. So we can become the customer if in the long run it looks like you've got a business that goes beyond the government side.
I think I would absolutely endorse that comment. I think with the new space era that we're all familiar with, that has changed the mindset of people throughout the space industry and the space community in general. I have been involved personally in companies that were intending to do satellite life. It seems to be going on and off, is that? Intending to do satellite life extension. And one of those companies, Orbital Recovery Corporation, actually initialed a contract with a commercial company to extend the life of satellites. So I know from first-hand business experience that there is a commercial market potentially. Now, from the point of view of deep space industries, we would hope to provide fuel to the companies that would extend the lives of satellites. We also see companies like Bigelow Aerospace who hope to provide commercial facilities in space. So we see a growing ecosystem of people who will need the provider, which would be deep space industries. So it's an evolving world, but people these days are much more familiar with thinking in commercial terms. And they see that with everything from Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, X-Corp. There are many, many companies now whose activities are changing the way people view the economic sort of system of space.
Brian already mentioned that NASA has similar programs. They've done it in the past, and they're talking about doing it in the future. So I think it's undeniable that NASA is going to be a big part of that. It's a shame that other space agencies aren't doing the same thing. ESA, JAXA, they could easily do this. For some reason, they don't quite have the same commercial emphasis in their overall spending. They're maybe a bit scared of innovation. Maybe that's something that can be changed. I don't know. Certain people in the agencies are scared of innovation, I would say. But from the XPRIZE point of view, okay. Testing. Okay. So from the XPRIZE, better. From the XPRIZE point of view,
It's black spot.
It's a radio.
I think the volume of my voice is not correlated with the dropouts. So we seek to, as I showed before, we seek to inspire entrepreneurs. When we choose a prize, when we design a prize, we look for a market failure that we're trying to overcome. And so that's, in fact, exactly what Andrew was talking about. There's a clear advantage to doing something in the future, but there's some reason why it's not yet happening. And so the Ansari XPRIZE, which was won back in 2004, arguably had an impact on opening up the suborbital space tourism market, or in general the suborbital flight market. By changing perceptions, it's not just the prize money, it's also changing the perceptions of the people who are involved. It's again recognizing the winner that gives them a chance to succeed further. And I think we can play one part in this story, but by far not the only, not the main role.
Actually, have you got something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a sort of a more global perspective, I suppose, and sort of give you a framework to think about this stuff, because I think the role that you're playing in XPRIZE is exactly that for people outside of the US. And the US is a little bit unique in that you can get these, what I would call giant, sexy, billionaire-funded type projects off the ground without Google XPRIZE. You can get a company like Planetary Resources, who's done some fabulous work, raised quite a lot of money in a country like the US in a way that you could not anywhere else in the world. Maybe China, but certainly not private money. And so when we talk about private space and a commercial space, I think that market failure is really the experience that the rest of the world has. So a Google asteroid XPRIZE is really going to be how we kickstart this thing for, I think, the startups and other investors around the world to get that first rung on the ladder. Like many, many other industries, including Google themselves, when they first launched their search engine, there was nobody to invoice back then, right? There was no, yes, there's a simple route from A to B in terms of getting this business up and flying. But if you can start expanding the realm of that ecosystem, then you can start uncovering where the value is. So I think do an asteroid XPRIZE, please, Andrew, and then compete in it, please, Kirby, and then open it up the ecosystem.
And I'll give you 2 slots for CubeSats on my space page.
Great, we'll talk after.
And just to add to the constituents of that ecosystem, supply chains are something that have come up in various contexts over the last couple of days, but that are critical to thinking about how we actually make this stuff happen. And some of them are in existence, some of them are speculative, and making the shadowy speculative ones more solid and more real, I think, are part of this process of kickstarting the industry.
Yeah, the second question I was going to ask actually sort of is not a bad segue on some of those points, is that in this event, is this working? In this event, right, basically what we were trying to do was to get the space people and the mining industry to talk to each other. Now, the mining industry is very conservative, and if there was some way of changing their perception of this possible future direction for their industry, then that would be very useful. That's part of the purpose of what we've been trying to do the last couple of days. But in terms of pools of money outside the US that are very large, the mining industry is actually quite a good place to be looking at that sort of thing. When I've talked to the mining people about us and this activity, a term came up very often, and the term was baby steps. Right? They don't want to do anything risky, big, whatever. But if you can do some things that help them along the way, that would be very useful to them. So if we're looking at engaging with that big pool of money, can you suggest any baby steps that might help us towards engaging with the mining industry?
I mean, the mining industry is a highly technical industry that is going through a revolution right now in automation. So they have to lower the cost of operation massively. So they're starting to invest in autonomous robotics. They don't want to send people down dark holes in the ground anymore. Much better to send robots. So they are becoming much more computerized and digitally oriented, which is also means that head office of the mining company is embracing big data and is starting to understand what is going on in its mines, which it today doesn't actually. Generally, it's the mine site manager that knows what's going on. The people in head office often do not know in detail what is going on or what the risks are involved. So I think baby steps includes the whole gamut of sensors and big data to manage mine sites and understanding how to do that autonomously. Autonomous robotics on the ground, even manufacturing custom materials for those mines. Now, you can probably then hear that all of those things I've chosen to mention are also critical for standing up some kind of autonomous mine on the moon or on some large asteroid and so on. So I think that the other areas that also are changing are how they fund projects, how explorers and smaller miners, raise capital and put bonds out into the market based on future value. All those kinds of things are also going on in innovation in the fintech sector. So I think baby steps involves a whole range of different areas, but you're absolutely right. They're going to be watching this.
So technically, I think many of us could sort of agree upon what sort of technical demonstration baby steps would be. Go out and observe it, touch it, move it around, bring it back, do something useful with it, produce something valuable, sell it. But another interesting way to look at it is maybe a baby step to get to unleashing some of that huge financial reservoir in the mining sector would be some sort of co-branding. And so Team Hakuto in particular, you may have seen on Kyle's charts, there was a few sponsors along the top of the rover. One of them was IHI, Ishikawajima Heavy Industries, which is sort of not the biggest aerospace company in Japan, but it's one of the serious players. And as I understand it, they didn't really spend a huge amount of money to put that logo on there, but the team wanted that on there to sort of make that connection. So that sort of co-branding connection where, in this case it was an aerospace company, but why not a mining company? Why not have a mining sponsored payload on a lunar lander in the future?
Which sounds like a brilliant idea, I think. Thinking about, is this working now? My former career, before being an academic, was actually as a heritage consultant in mining industry. And I still go to a reasonable number of mining conferences, like the one we've been holding this conjointly with. I was actually at a mining conference in Broken Hill, not last year, year before, and this was one of these conferences where investors come to meet with the exploration companies. And I sat down to breakfast with an investor and made the mistake of continuing the conversation beyond my immediate interest in the on-the-ground approvals process for terrestrial mining, and mentioned space mining. And that look came over his face, and he thought, how do I get out of here as fast as I can? She's going to turn into a space butter, and this is going to be a bad scene. And I could see the expression in his eyes, and I thought, okay, shut up, I'm not going to, this is probably someone I won't speak to again in the course of the conference. But this was like a major investor that was present at that mining conference specifically because they were looking for exploration companies to throw their money at. So that was just an interesting little encounter that reveals some of the attitudes. So, because for the mining companies, that is actually where everything ends. It's not necessarily their boards or their whatever. They're looking at people like this person who is they're reporting to in the end, who are financing the exploration phase, which, only 5% of companies get beyond that exploration phase. And this is something I know John has lots of interesting things to say about as well. So I suppose it's probably true to say we do have a credibility problem with these big mining companies. And that relates to a whole range of things which I'm sure everybody else here can also add some insight into.
I'm not exactly sure whether this answers your original question, though I get the sense we're straying a little bit from it. But in terms of both baby steps and also the perspective of how our industry can work with the mining industry, first of all, our business plan is around baby steps. We start with small spacecraft. We look to finance that through sponsorships, selling technologies that we develop, selling rides, selling technology demonstration opportunities, a variety of different low-scale things that we can do. Some of those, that's all about risk retirement as much as anything, and moving us incrementally forward, which is similar to the way a large mining operation works. The robotic operations that we will undertake, as Tim mentioned, that's something of great interest in the mining industry at the moment, so there is a certain synergy in what we're doing there. I was actually presenting at a luncheon in Melbourne a year or two ago, and I mentioned the suggestion that perhaps when the arm of our first spacecraft that's going to sort of reach out to an asteroid has the logo of BHP or Rio Tinto on it. And there was somebody from Rio Tinto in the room who came up to me afterwards and he said, that's fantastic. We would love to have that association in people's minds. And a final link is in STEM education, because that's something that concerns the breadth of industry in Australia, but certainly I understand the mining industry is concerned about that. And so the connection between something exciting that's kind of loosely related to mining, and that to put an Australian company brand with that was an exciting sort of conjunction.
I guess the one thing I would add is the thing that I find interesting is the science or the demonstration at an experiment level of the ability to actually do a conversion of some resource to something else. For example, NASA selected an instrument, an in situ resource utilization instrument to fly on our next Mars rover. And it's a device to convert carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into usable oxygen. And it's a technology, it's a terrestrial technology, but we had to turn it into something that can fly in deep space, and fly and work on the surface of Mars. So if there are other things like, again, if we can bring you back simulant material from which you can demonstrate, how do I get water or something out of it in a useful way? Those kind of experiments, I think, at least in my world, would get a lot of credibility. And that's not flying to an asteroid, it's once you're there, how do I actually produce something useful?
Okay, questions from the audience? 1, 2, first.
Just on that, boring companies talk to brickmakers like Boral about how do we make a concrete block out of lunar simulant.
Right.
Boring is where the money is. The money's not in gold, it's in cement.
In the previous Off-Earth Mining Forum, we were chairs. The third guy was also a chair who was doing just that, making bricks out of lunar simulant. So we've got miles of lunar simulant at the university if you would like.
But we're not doing it to make the bricks, we're doing it to involve boring. That's the baby steps, that's making you're giving them something that leads back to their business. My question is, if I wanted to buy a ton of nickel iron outside of low Earth orbit, how would I do that? I have cash, I want to buy a ton of nickel iron, futures contract if you have to. How can a customer be a customer of the off-Earth mining industry right now?
Well, I imagine DSI would certainly sign a contract with you pretty quickly. And not in jest, some of the comments earlier about the NASA model for changing to COTS, we would like somebody to say to us, if you will deliver us 1,000 tonnes of whatever in orbit, we can finance that if we have a contract with a proper basis to it. There are all sorts of mechanisms that allow you to do that. So that is the key thing. And clearly, for a company like DSI, and I would imagine for anybody who's commercially in the off-Earth mining world, poor choice, off-Earth mining arena, everybody has to have commercial customers, and that's what underpins, whether it's an anchor tenancy type concept or whatever. If somebody is willing to say they will buy it, then there are ways to finance it. Somebody else want to?
Second question over there.
Actually, it's a bit of a comment as well, if I may. Can everyone hear me? Yes, sir. Joe Kukutsa is my name, Managing Director of Mire International, which has been in the business of facilitating collaboration amongst the mining industry for the last 59 years. Look, the mining industry is a very complex beast. It's not a uniform industry. It's made up of all sorts of different size companies, from the mega size companies that people have mentioned, the Rios, BHP brothers, all the way down to tiny junior explorers with, at the moment, no money. They are obviously facing a very difficult time at the moment and somewhat sort of distracted as a result. Thus, for example, why it was mentioned that the industry is looking for ways to cut costs, do more with less, and all these sort of things. And one of the things that they are very keen in doing, however, is to see and look at other industries and other cross developments in other places where they can actually learn or indeed pick up new technologies, new sensors, whatever, that may help them to achieve those sort of cost savings, automation, or whatever it may be. So if you want to capture interest from industry, first of all, you're likely to do it at the upper end, because that's where the money's, the R&D is normally spent. They're the ones that
What do you mean upper end? What do you mean upper end?
Sorry?
What is upper end?
Oh, the Rios, the BHP.
Oh, the big companies.
Sorry, the bigger miners, if you like.
Yeah.
Vertically integrated integrators sort of places. And they're the ones who are actively looking for solutions right now and have the capacity to do so. So they'll be very interested to see what's happening. They would be interested to see what's happening in the space. And indeed they are actively looking at what's happening in this thing. So that's the way, if you wish to actually make connections to the industry, to present yourself as a way of looking at new technology being developed, or indeed aggregation of new technologies to actually solve a problem that might actually be adapted across to that industry.
There's a question at the back, over there.
Yeah, I'm Sean Sanson, postdoc researcher
Bit louder.
down in Tasmania.
Louder.
Yeah, postdoc researcher from CSIRO down in Tasmania. And I am currently working on the ground finding UAVs and capturing data. So I think what is very interesting and important in this, from a kind of mining engineering perspective and space engineering, is that we researchers and developers get access to data. Some of the NASA data I know is open access to, but there are also maybe data that is maybe not accessible. And I think that is very important to push, say, education, research into the industry. And I just wanted to say that the data here is very important for the research and industry as a common whole. And that was just important for us to get forward.
If this was Q&A, I'd be taking everything as a comment. Here we go.
Andrew, you raised the question, how do we talk with the miners, and you talked about baby steps. Before even getting to the baby steps, we have to learn their language, and we have to use the sorts of ideas and the sorts of concepts that the mining industry uses. And as you know, you've heard me talk about this before, and many others have, and I'll be on it again this afternoon. We have to, in our conversations with the mining industry, be aware of the details of words like ore and resource, mineral resource quantification, project planning, mine planning, ore body model development, and I'll talk more about that later. But only if the message that we try to put to the miners is one which is already educated in terms of mining engineering and in terms of extractive metallurgy. Only if we avoid making schoolboy hours in that area, and only if we understand their words and their context and their concepts will we make traction. And for example, here in DSI, we've been developing a document, ta-da, which is a desktop concepts development study. And that goes in the hierarchy of studies in the minerals industry before a scoping study, and that leads on to a pre-feasibility study and a final feasibility study. We have to use the sorts of techniques, the thought techniques that they have, that they use, and the sorts of concepts that they have if you want to have a conversation with them. And there's still a problem, of course, that Joe talks about, that they're all strapped for cash, but they are interested.
Can I add, I think you're absolutely right, Mark, and that's me. And that's because, in my work in that industry, it's precisely what I had to do to write reports, because you need the foremen and the supervisors and to translate what you write into action, and you have to use their language to make that happen. And that's something that's very much informed my own work as well, because I'm writing my stuff as if I'm trying to convince the foreman on a site to not run their dozer straight through the middle of a site. So I think that's a really good point. And because the language goes along with cycles of development and with characterising, I think, like, gangue minerals and ore minerals, and the concept, like an ore body is a time-dependent thing. It's not automatically a resource. It's only a resource as and when those factors all come into phase together, and it becomes. So there's a whole lot of concepts around there which I think would be great for us to develop a greater fluency in.
Can I partly agree with you and partly also disagree, right? Having just talked about the mining industry. So I'm looking at the mining industry in a similar way. It's a great source of energy and resources and potential sponsorship and logos, and we've got applications and stuff that we can sell to the mining industry to solve problems on the Earth using space technology. Awesome. Actually, the model that's going to work economically in deep space is probably going to be completely different. And I would be really talking to the people in the 3D manufacturing and automation world who are going to be wanting to have that robot dock with the asteroid, mine some stuff, and turn it into something, not send it back as an ingot, right? So the whole notion of sending it back is, I think, a little bogus, actually. Just keep that quiet, okay? Just keep that to yourselves. I think that the thing that we're going to send back from space is the learnings, the software, the data, the use cases, the machines that will be applicable to problems on the Earth, where we have 10,000 abandoned mine sites that we've got to clean up, and 3,000 active ones that are probably not being managed that well right now. So from an environmental and sustainability point of view, that is, if not an economic one. In space, we are going to be wanting to make things to make the mission work. And that is where the economic value is going to be, placing that thing in that place to do that. You know, it's like that line out of Ocean's 11 where Danny Ocean goes, thanks for the thing with the guy at the place. Right? It's going to be very much that kind of Internet of Things type value proposition, I think. And bringing those two worlds together, totally. The funny thing is that that is also how the mining industry on Earth is going to change. It's going to change that way. So I kind of agree with you. Read the book, know the terms, and I also think understand what manufacturing 2.0 looks like, what Internet of Things looks like, and talk that language too, and translate.
Anyone else? Kirby, you wanted yes or no? Yes?
Oh, yeah, just a quick point of clarification in case anybody has misconceptions of what DSI is planning to do. We're not planning to bring stuff back to Earth. We're planning to use it in space, whether it's raw materials, make things with 3D printing. Exactly, we're working with Made in Space and with others. In fact, I was just at Made in Space at NASA Ames a few weeks ago, and it was really quite amazing. They referred to it as sort of the Wright brothers moment, where they would send the plan up for something and print it for the astronauts on the space station. It really was quite an amazing thing to witness, and that's the kind of next step that DSI would be in, not bringing stuff back to Earth. Not that you would necessarily suggest.
They emailed the plan, right? It didn't go up as a piece of paper.
Okay, next question was here. There's a couple over there.
Yep. Yeah, I guess sort of moved off the topic I was going to comment on, but I'll just sort of raise my hand. I'm from DFW Bilton, managers on automation in our support office, and I look after, I led the autonomous haulage program in iron ore operation for about 3 years. I'm moving to a corporate role that's looking at the automation program and the mine of the future for all assets in copper, coal, and the others. And I guess there's some key focus areas that we're looking at the moment. It's around future mining methods, including autonomy and smart network operations, big data and data analytics. Why we've sort of come here is a look at the, the off-earth industry or your industry that you're in, and looking at where we could leverage off some of those innovative technologies. Now, I know Chris Acme was at Carnegie Robotics before. I was interested in talking with iSpace about their drone and stuff. We're looking at the whole mineral value chain. And you look at exploration, can we use some of those drones, some of the different things that you're using in space now that we're potentially going to use, and trial them out on our sites or partnering those sorts of ways to. And I guess that's how we can sort of build, work together. Of course, I'm more than happy to talk during lunch or people.
Great.
So we're the Myra project. We're part of. We're a sponsor of those. In terms of looking at interoperability and how all the different assets on our different OEMs can work together and talk in that sort of that mine of the future space, but no one in it, and they're just all the drones working together.
Okay, great, thanks.
Question
at the top.
Sorry, mainly for Andrew and Brian. Andrew, you were talking about incentivising those milestone payments. They seem to be a lot about trying to get the people to focus on more of a whole mission side of things, like the test and evaluation essentially they need to do to achieve the final mission. Obviously, JPL and NASA have a lot of history in the whole systems engineering point of view. Is there any sort of mentoring that is going on there for the teams and bigger, more experienced organisations like NASA?
So, not sure if Brian will want to comment on what I'm going to say, but there is a program called Catalyst. It's a NASA program specifically to bring some of that expertise around lunar landing into the private sector. It's only eligible for, only US teams are eligible for that. So that is a fully mandated, organized project. It's a Space Act agreement, no funds exchanged, pure partnership. And other space agencies around the world are doing similar things locally with their teams. I know the Indians are doing that, I know the Germans are doing that. So there's an enormous amount of interest in the space agencies for what we're doing, and people are sort of busting at the seams to get and actually help those teams. So I think the answer is a resounding yes from our side.
And you just mentioned Space Act agreements. That's certainly a way to get industry and NASA talent working together, and NASA's always open to that. But I think for us, anyway, we're trying to create some opportunities where industry and private business can come forward with ideas, partnerships that where you bring something, we'll provide the ride, we'll take you where we're going, and you find a way to use that to your benefit. So that's where something I know NASA would like to continue to do.
Next question, Ed.
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part thing. One, I'm sort of started watching this, from the exploration and mining sector, and I'm wondering is, do you actually think what you're going to be doing is essentially mining? It seems a lot more to be sort of chemical engineering, manufacturing, utilities. So I'm wondering, what do you think is actually the ideal partner, or which would be the industry should say, we need to speak to them, and them. I suspect mining industry is probably not even in the top 10 of the list. And second, one area I think the mining industry and the petroleum industry and things like chemicals might be able to help in is actually the social license issue, which is some of the talk yesterday were covering the ethics of this. And I think there's big problems going ahead in that, in actually getting kind of both the official political support and social support. And as an industry with not the greatest reputation in the world, and the industry might actually be able to help more on that than the technological side. So first the question, which industry do you think it will be in space?
Well, look,
how are you going to deal with
so let's talk about where all industries are going, because I think you're coming up with a taxonomy of what mining is, and I'm saying that's changing. So mining itself is going to become all those things: chemical processing, autonomous vehicles. They probably some of them have their own airlines. What mining is not somebody with a pick and a shovel looking for a piece of gold, right? So it's a highly sophisticated, globalized business involving it, right? So what we're also doing is we're imagineering a future industry which has all those characteristics. So there's definitely an overlap. Is it one-to-one? Nothing's going to be one-to-one. Is there an overlap? I think there is. And I think there's a passion, perhaps, of some people who work in terrestrial mining, for example, Mark, who is interested in where else he can take that experience. And maybe that is where the social contract comes from.
I think your point about the social license to operate is absolutely critical, because it's not over. Well, from my perspective, that is precisely the work I've been doing in mining context as a heritage specialist for a long time. And within the space sector, these concepts are really, really poorly developed. And I think there are an enormous amount of lessons, given that terrestrial mining has had more than its fair share of adverse public reactions, and we see many of those played out in Australian newspapers every day. It's an area, I think, off-Earth mining or off-Earth industries have not even begun to consider properly, both because things that are far away, people tend not to think of them. But as with terrestrial mining too, all you need is for one thing to go badly wrong, and suddenly everybody knows about it, and it alters the course of perceptions around future events of that nature. So I think there are a lot of really important lessons to be learnt from looking at the whole social license to operate within terrestrial mining. And if people are interested, I actually have a paper on this very topic that will be published in Space Policy Journal, hopefully next year. Because there's a, as Kim I think raised earlier too, there's not a huge amount of public awareness of what's been proposed for off-Earth mining at the moment, although events like this raise that awareness a lot. And people will have reactions about it, some of which we can anticipate and predict, some of which we will have no idea what they are until they emerge. And this is stuff that we do actually need to know about as we go into the future trying to develop these industries. And yet, learning from terrestrial mining in that regard, I think is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everybody. What are panel sessions for at conferences? One is to have a discussion like this, but probably the more important thing is to stimulate discussion in the following break. So you always put it before lunch. There's always more questions. There's more hands up than we can deal with. So let's continue the discussion at lunch, but meanwhile, can we thank the panel? We're back here at 5 past, is that right?